Let's stitch up the leaf borders. So we are in how to stitch it number 4, which is all about how to stitch up the leaf borders. And as you can see from the picture here, we've got the leaf border on all 4 sides, and it ends in the 6-inch diamond in a square blocks in the corners. The main part of the border is 4 inches wide, and we've got a 1-inch wide fussy cut border on the outside. Now, you don't have to fussy cut fabric if you've got a gorgeous color that you absolutely love. Just go with it. But if you do want to do some fussy cutting on one of these gorgeous prints, this is Tula Pink Daydreamer, and depending on how you cut the fabric, you can either end up with the circles or you've got all of the diamonds. Make sure that you're using the same kind of fussy cut piece in the same spot on each of your borders to make sure that everything looks good. I'm doing the black and white, so I'm using the medallion print, and you'll see that in just a little bit. So when you are stitching the borders, if depends on whether you're doing the short version of the vase or the tall vase. Both versions you're going to need 2 of the 18-inch leaf borders. So these are the top and the bottom, and this is going to be stitched in 2 sections, and for each border you'll need 2 borders. You're going to need the background fabric for the center, 2 of the narrow borders which you may or may not have fussy cut. You're going to need a piece of stabilizer. You're going to need a piece of batting. If you are stitching up the short vase quilt, then you're going to need 2 22-inch borders for the sides. And if you are stitching up the tall vase quilt, you're going to need 2 of the 28-inch borders. So the 18 and the 22-inch borders, 2 pieces or 2 hoopings each. This 28-inch border, you're going to have 3 hoopings. So make sure that you've got your batting and stabilizer prepared and the fabrics as specified. We are going to prepare the background. Now, I'm actually going to be stitching up a 22-inch border with you. I'm stitching up the short vase version of the quilt, so I need 2 18-inch, 2 22-inch. Make sure you're looking at the markings if you are stitching up the 28-inch. So for all of the borders, we are going to center the batting on the stabilizer. I'm going to pop my iPad over there, pull in the fabric and stuff. So I've got my piece of stabilizer. Now this might seem a bit backwards if you're used to marking up stabilizer first, but we are piecing onto the batting and we're actually going to mark up the stabilizer after we've done that. Let me just zoom out a little bit here so that you can see everything. So we've got the stabilizer. We are going to center the batting onto the stabilizer. Make sure everything is nice and smooth, and then you want to take the center panel. Now this has been cut to 4.5 inches wide, so I'm actually going to use a ruler to make sure that I've got everything exactly in the right spot. So we want to go, let's see, 1 3/4 inches from the edge. Now you can see my edge is not overly straight here on the batting, at least. Let's go with the edge of the stabilizer. I'm going to center that so that we are perfectly straight, and we should be, let's turn this around, 2 3/4 inches in from the edge on that side. So we are in good shape there, and that is nice and straight. Now let me just pull this in. We've got the, let me scoot everything down a little bit so that you can see what I've got. we've got the 20-inch long, or 24-inch long actually, for the 22-inch border. I've got 2 pairs of the fussy cut narrow borders, and because of how the fabric worked and endeavoring to save as much fabric as possible, fussy cutting can be quite fabric intensive. They kind of go together in pairs. We've got 2 pieces that are exactly the same, going this way, and 2 pieces that are different to this but also exactly the same. So the key is make sure that you have one of these in the exact same spot for both of the borders, one of these in the exact same spot for both of the borders. So we've got lots of options here. We could do it so that the this bit is in the seam allowance, or we could do it so that this bit is in the seam allowance. Some of this is actually going to get chopped off. This is wider than it needs to be, just because we're doing some quilting and embroidery on it, and I want it to be perfect when it is done. So I'm going to place that one on the top, and we're going for that being perfectly aligned there, perfectly aligned and centered. And I'm going to use some pins to hold this all layers together. Okay, now on the other side I'm going to put one of the other kind of borders, so we're going to go that way again and get the edges aligned. Nudging everything into place. Let's get that pinned in position as well. Okay, now we're going to stitch both of these seam lines, 1/4 inch seam allowance, same as any other seam, and then the border will be pressed out towards the outside of the block. I will be back when I've stitched the seam lines and done the pressing. The center panel with the 2 fussy cut borders stitched on both sides, pressed away from the center. Now we are ready to do some marking. Now before we do that though, I tidied up the ends of the panels so that I can get a very nice center line here. I had little bits of batting and stabilizer stuck out at both ends, so just trim the ends off so that you're level with the center, or level it with the ends of your center panel here, and then you'll be able to make some nice marks on the back, because we are going to flip this over so you can see my seam lines here. And if you're looking at the diagrams, we've got the borders oriented top to bottom like this, and the instruction says draw a horizontal center line, so that is going across this way. I'm actually going to turn the border this way so that it is a little bit easier to see what I'm doing. This is the 22-inch border, remember, so this is measuring 24 inches long, so I'm going to mark the center here, and then using my seam line as the guide, and hopefully we are perpendicular all the way across, yay, and I'm going to draw my line that way. So that is my horizontal center line. Now then, depending on whether you're stitching the 18-inch border, the 22-inch border, or the 28-inch border, what you're going to do next is going to be a little bit different. So for the 18-inch border, make sure you're looking at the instructions. For the 18-inch border, you're going to draw a line 9 inches above, 9 inches below, left and right as we're oriented right now. For the 22-inch border, we're going to go 11 inches from center on both sides. And for the 28-inch border, we're actually going to be 6 inches one side, 6 inches the other side. So this is a 22-inch border. I am going to go 11 inches on either side. So making sure that I am right on the piecing line here, and let's see, right on the center line. I can do my 11 inches that way, and we're going to do the same thing in the other direction, making sure that everything is nice and straight. I've got 11 from that direction, so we can draw the line right there. Let's pop the ruler off to the side for now. Let's mark the top. Doesn't really matter which end we do that, but it's good to know. Well, actually it does matter which way you're doing it, depending on what you're doing with your fussy cutting pieces here. So make sure that the top is the same based on where you've put these two for all of your pieces. Okay, now we're going to go and stitch along these lines that we've marked. So the center line and the two off to the sides, using a stitch length of 6 millimeters or 4 stitches to the inch. It's useful to be able to see these markings on the front as well as on the back. And if you want to make sure that your borders don't get caught up at all, you do a little basting line along the edges of the borders here. That will just help everything to stay nice and flat and ensure that you don't get anything caught up. So if you want to do a scant 1/4 inch in from the edge, or even 1/8 of an inch in from the edge, that will work just fine. Now that we've got these lines basted, and I made sure I had a bobbin thread that was easily visible on the top here, now we are ready to actually get stitching. So for the 22-inch border, also for the 18-inch border, there's a top and a bottom. Now I've got, just so we can get maximum amount of stuff in the video here, the top's over here, the bottom's over here. So stitches in 2 pieces, a top and a bottom. For the 28-inch border, there are 3 sections, a top, middle and bottom. So whenever you are placing your design, make sure you're looking at the pictures. You want to make sure that you use the center line as your primary alignment line. Now this box here, that's color number 1, that's stitched on the stabilizer, corresponds with this area here. So these 2 points should align here. These 2 points should align here. we're going to go with these 2 points first. So make sure you've got the top that you've marked at the top of your hoop. We're going to grab a couple of pins and put one pin through the intersection of the center line and the border right there. The other pin is going to go on the other side right there. Now then, we've got a little bit of tearing going around the corner here. Tension has gotten a little bit tight here, so make sure you're going with the needle holes. So we're gonna, and I'm working again on my June Taylor cushion quilted square and blocker so I can push the pin all the way in. We're gonna go into that hole there, and we are gonna pop that in there. Make sure that everything is flush up against the hoop, and as we come up here we should be able to see that the seam line is right on top of the basting line. So if we've got that super nice and flat, when we put a pin in here, so this corner where we've got that line going with the border, and we pop another pin in right there, if we were to lift this up, we should be right in, and you probably can't see it on the video, a bit of a strange angle, you should be able to see that we're right in the corner holes. So the main thing though is if you've got those 2 pins in the right place and you are straight along the seam, then you will be good at this end. So I'm just going to pop a pin there fairly randomly as it happens. And now, because I've got stabilizer that I can see on 3 sides, I'm actually going to hold this in place with magic tape, Scotch magic tape. So I'm going to put some down there, and I am not going to be frugal with this. I want to make sure that I've got full coverage all the way along. And this piece is going to go here. Now then, we can take those pins out. We can take those pins out. Because I've got the weight of this extra piece of fabric down here, I'm going to put a pin in here to hold that, and that will just be a little bit of extra security down there. I can turn this over, and we should be able to see from the back, especially if you hold it up to a light, that you should be able to see that you're on the center line here and you are actually going up the basting lines there. So we are now going to go to the machine. Now that everything is in the hoop, this is actually pretty straightforward stitching. It's going to do the quilting in the center, it's going to do the quilting on the side panels, then it's going to give you some applique placement lines for all of the leaves and the center. You'll put your shapes in place, which brings me to a point when you're cutting the leaves, especially if you're using the SVG files or the FCM on your Brother Scan cut, make sure as you're taking the leaves off the cutting mat that you keep them in order. It will make life so much easier for getting them situated. So for the short vase, we made all of the leaves the same color. For the large, the tall vase, we actually had a couple of different colors, the option to use a couple of different colors. So just keep everything in order on the cutting mat so that you can get everything positioned. But now that we've got this fabric on the hoop, it's a straightforward stitch out, as I said. Quilting in the center, quilting on the borders, applique placement line, fuse your applique shapes in place, do all of the stitching, and when you've done that, I will be back here to show you how we're going to get everything aligned for the second part of the design, and so that you can have a finished border. The first hooping is all finished, so we've got all of the beautiful applique on here. So I'm going to show you how we prepare this so that we can do the second hooping, which will be the bottom half of this border. So this is the 22-inch border. The 18-inch one works exactly the same. For the 28-inch one, you'll have a middle and then a bottom. So we're going to take everything out of the hoop. I'm going to put that off to one side just for a moment, and I'm going to remove all of the tape. It makes it easier to get the stabilizer off. Also going to remove the basting line across here. Now make sure that you're not confusing it with the basting line that is the center line. We want to make sure that's intact because these 2 points here we are going to want to use to get the second hooping in place. So make sure that it is the basting line around the outside of the design that is coming out. Otherwise you got a tiny bit of a problem. More of a redo than not going to work at all, but it's easier just to do things the one time without having to repeat. So pull these little bits out. Now I'm not actually taking the basting line out from the sides. That will potentially get cut off. Let's see how, because we're going to trim this to 6.5 inches. We've got 4 inches in the middle. It's actually going to be right in the middle. So at some point you might want to take those stitches out. It's not necessary to do it right now, although you can do if you want to. What is important right now is to make sure that this stabilizer in the middle is gone. We want the least amount of overlap possible as far as this stabilizer is concerned. So we've got a bunch of threads that we can trim here, and I'm actually going to dig a little bit to get this stabilizer out right up to the quilting, and this right here, although it's not too big of a deal if it doesn't come out. Okay, now just for ease I'm going to tear away the stabilizer from around the outside. And now we are ready to do the second hooping. Now if you want to give it a quick press, you can do, just to make sure that everything is nice and flat. Otherwise we are going to bring the hoop back. I've got a piece of stabilizer cut out and ready to go. So we will pop this new piece of stabilizer into the hoop, and I'm going to go and stitch out color number 1 for the second part of the design, and I'll show you how we get this aligned with the placement lines that are going to stitch onto the stabilizer. We've got the placement line here. Now bearing in mind the center of the design is here, so at the top of the hoop we are going to be aligning the center line intersections with the border, these 2 points here, up here, and we're going to be aligning these 2 points down here. So make sure you've got the top of your border up at the top of the hoop. We're going to place this in exactly the same way as we did for the first hooping. You can actually completely ignore the fact that we've already got this border up here. But remember I said that always use the placement line at the center as your primary. So we're going to pop a pin through there. We are going to pop a pin through here. Again, I'm working on my June Taylor Quilted cushioned square and blocker, something like that. Cushioned quilted square and blocker. And we're going to put this pin into this corner here. We're going to take this pin and put it into this corner here. And you want to keep the pins as vertical as possible. Make sure that everything is pushed down all the way to the stabilizer. And then you can actually check along that you are going straight. Can you see how beautifully straight that is? So that by the time you get down here, if you were to pop a pin in there and a pin in there, when you lift up you should be pretty much right on your corners. So we are good to put some tape down here. If you have stabilizer showing, tape is by far the easiest way to get everything held in place. Otherwise, you're going to use a couple of pins down the sides. Let's pop some tape down here along the bottom. You can take those pins out now, and I'm going to use one pin up here just to make sure that that bit doesn't flip over or pull on anything. So we are good to go now. You can always do a double check on the back. You should be able to see, if you hold this up to a light, you should be able to see the center line there through the stabilizer, and we are looking pretty good here. So to finish up this section, we are going to stitch the applique. It's going to do the quilting first in the center, then the borders. You should find that right here and here we hook up pretty much exactly. Placement line to show you exactly where to put the applique pieces. Now there's going to be a couple of layers of placement. We've got the leaf and stem. It's going to do all of the applique for that first, and then there's a circle that sits over the center here that is going to hide the join. So you'll see the placement lines for the leaf and the stem. Do all of the stitching, and then there'll be another placement line to show you exactly where to put that circle applique shape. Absolutely no way to get the shapes in the wrong place. You're shown exactly where to put them. So I'm going to go off and stitch this, and then I will be back with you. The second hooping has been completed for this 22-inch leaf border. So regardless of which border you're doing, as soon as you're done with the final hooping, you can take everything out of the hoop. We'll pop that off to one side. And you know, it's actually not so necessary to tear away the stabilizer from around the outside of this design, as we can just trim it away when we come to do the final trim. I will just take the basting stitches out here so that we can get rid of the stabilizer in the center, because that is going to need to go regardless, but the rest of it we can it will get removed when we do the final trim. So let's just get that, clip these threads that we've got here, and the rest of this will get trimmed away. If you like to be neat, which I have to say I have a tendency to like to be neat, I'm actually going to trim it away right now, or tear it away right now. So as far as trimming this goes, we're going to wait until we've got all of the pieces together before we do any trimming. The trimming actually depends, or the length of it actually depends on the flying geese blocks. Some machines, we've noticed, at least when you get past 6 to 8 inches, they don't necessarily stitch out at 100%. So have some leeway, and we're going to trim the flying geese blocks first, and then we're going to trim the leaf borders to match the flying geese measurement. So stitch all 4 of your borders. Make sure that you have the top marked on each one of them, and always, if you are fussy cutting, make sure that you've got each border on the same side. So all of the borders that were fussy cut like this, you want to have on the one side with the top at this end, and same for the other one, to make sure that your fussy cutting looks good all the way around the quilt. Let's see, I think that's about it. One more thing though, if you are stitching up the tall vase with the 28-inch leaf border, you're actually going to start in the center first, then add the top, and then add the bottom. And it's exactly the same concept. You're going to align with the center first, and then you'll align with the 6-inch line and the 6-inch line for the third one too. Super easy. Now we can start looking at the flowers and how to put the center together.